Welcome to OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript. We are your hosts, James Snell and Matteo Collina.
There's only so fast that a person can consume data. When you're visualizing it, that's really the use case that you're thinking of is somebody's watching this information. And because they're people, you have to keep in mind, they might look away. So even if they're staring at it, there's about 1 second, I think, is about the sweet spot of saying nothing should be sent to update faster than 1 second.
For this episode, we are sitting down with Anthony Aragues, author of Visualizing Streaming Data. Currently, he's working for an automotive tech company focusing on connected vehicle data. Anthony talks to us today about data visualization, the art of making data intuitive, and the tools and libraries used to do so.
You can have a pretty chart that's useless. I think we've all seen those. And you can also have a complex calculation that's meaningless. So really, the primary thing about doing good visualizations is understanding the data, understanding the context of that data, and trying to make it as useful as you can.
Let's get into it. This is OpenHive.JS from Nearform. Welcome to OpenHive.JS, our podcast on all things JavaScript with Nearform guests. I'm Matteo Collina, and I'm joined today by my colleague James Snell and our guest, Anthony Aragues, for a chat about data visualization and the art of making data intuitive. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing today? Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, I'm doing good. I, in general, just really love technology. I'd say I'm not a programming enthusiast, but I see it as a very useful tool for making cool stuff. I just think it's really necessary in today's technology and climate to be able to do that in order to achieve things. I keep bouncing between things that kind of progress technology, and I kind of stumbled upon this data visualization thing as something that I wanted to accomplish but didn't see people making good progress on. So I started doing it myself, and it became a niche.
Nice. Yeah. It's, there's so many systems out there generating so much information that, this idea of making it intuitive and being able to visualize it in useful ways. I mean, it's so absolutely critical. And there's so many places where you can point at and say, "Oh, that's a way of visualizing it. Don't know if it's the best." So, how did you step into this area? What was your first steps into data visualization, and how did you kind of develop that love for it?
Well, definitely the first steps were, my earliest tech jobs were sysadmin type things, which probably a mix between what we'd call operations and DevOps today. And, I was responsible for hundreds of systems and very complex systems at the time. And just keeping track of how everything was working or having scripts run between various components was a huge pain. And I would always develop dashboards for interacting with those environments and letting you know what the health was and stuff. Because for some reason, they never... the holistic view of how something was running was never really given to us by anybody we were paying licenses to. It was never context sensitive enough, I should say, because you could always get good monitoring dashboards for like your system or your database. But if you try to look for something and add meaning to it, like, hey, if this queue is filled up, that means you're not processing payments, and you might want to know what the value of all those payments are. That's something that nobody gives you unless you develop. So I started developing that stuff for my early jobs. And, that was pretty common stuff for what you see today. It was very static data, or at least point in time. And then if you wanted to get new data, you would refresh it. And then when I started doing security jobs more frequently, they had the big data problem when, big data was the key, the big buzzword like 10 years ago. And, it was just hard to consume it all. And some of it would be just streaming. So, I'd see lots of instances where you have your report, and your report is, set up to ask very specific questions, and hopefully the answers are formatted in a way that you need them to be, but it expects certain types of information. And then, you're making decisions on that. And then sometimes things just don't match up. Like, this doesn't make any sense. My report says this, but something went wrong. And you go look at the original data, and it's just, something was filtered out, or a schema changed. And so that didn't get updated with the report. And, I kept finding that separation from the data wasn't doing the reports and the dashboards any good. That people were streaming logs, they were doing like tail-f just to see what's going on, or even streaming database entries across screens. And people would catch stuff like that. And they'd say, "Oh, you see that just happened? Let's go find what that is." I was like, "There's got to be a better way of doing this." We've come so far in being able to do charts and understanding static data that's been sitting there for a while, or even hitting refresh regularly. So I started this whole niche of trying to visualize the streaming data, which starts out as something equivalent to just streaming the data by as it comes in, but then advances as you start highlighting information in there. Then you start translating it. Then you start giving it statistics and running information for moving time windows. And eventually you start figuring out how you can make it better, make a better process out of noticing the things out of that information that mean something to you, that are different than what you would see in those canned reports that you run on a schedule. So I guess it was, in a shorter answer, it was in response to needs on the job, and just, experiences in what the existing things were missing in the data.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about solving that immediate problem, scratching the itch that you have, and then kind of generalizing out from there. I know Matteo's said in the past, those are the best types of problems to solve.
Yeah, it's so this is one of the, like, you touched one of the key points that I really love talking about, and one of the things that I really like investigating, because when you are visualizing streaming data, what I have seen, I typically work on the logistical side of the problems. So, getting the streaming data down to a browser to show. Okay. So I typically work on the other, like on how to move data from A to B at scale. One of the key challenges when doing this type of streaming work is the fact that you're receiving chunk of data, and you have a certain rendering budget between the two chunks, and then you have a frame rate, and you go into more like extreme type of situation where the rendering can or cannot keep up, and you can do certain things to manage. How did you ever encounter this problem?
Of course. So, some of the things I've worked with are on the orders of, tens of thousands per second. And, you're not going to do that on an event basis, item by item. Just nothing will keep up. And so one of the big things to remember here is there's only so fast that a person can consume that data. And when you're visualizing it, that's really the use case that you're thinking of, is somebody's watching this information, and and because they're people, you have to keep in mind, they might look away, they can't just be staring at the thing the whole time. So even if they're staring at it, there's about 1 second, I think, is about the sweet spot of saying, look, nothing should be sent to update faster than 1 second. And you can have nice animations to bring that information in every second or something to keep it fresh. But you don't want to send anything more frequently than that. So in those 1 second batches, or maybe longer, you send batch information, and you only call out certain things. Any of the statistics you have, you can pre-batch, and you can send batch updates to those. Hey, I have 10,000 more, information events, and you can click here if you want to see what they were, right? But you don't have to represent each one of them. And then you need some way of understanding, well, which interesting things are in here that I might want to show in detail every 2 seconds or whatever, and then persist those on the screen for longer in case they look away. And those things are going to be something that's anomalous, something that according to a rule you've decided, anytime this happens, it's significant. Or if you want to do random sampling of the data just to get a good idea of what's going on and have some trust in that data so that you're not it's not completely hidden from you.
So I mean, you raise an important point there. Talking about the data refresh rates. Throwing something up every once a second. I know that there are some of the projects out there like grid, visualization grids and stuff that folks would use on the client side that put an emphasis on, hey, we can update data in real time thousands of times per second. Kind of stuff where the grid is redrawn and updated. And it's always felt like it's like great, you can do it fast, but is it actually useful? So there seems to be this kind of push and pull between what the technology is capable of doing versus what it should be doing, right, in order to actually be useful. Have you done much research, much study into that in terms of kind of best practices, and where can people go to kind of be able to make those decisions, and what's the trade-off between performance versus usability?
Yeah, it's kind of loaded. So, I've done I've done this kind of stuff on every library I can imagine, starting from plain JavaScript, moving through jQuery, Angular, Vue, and now React. React definitely wins when it comes to the virtual DOM, which makes a whole lot of sense. If you can use that technology and allow it to do the JavaScript statistics and stuff in the background, but only re-render what's visible, I think that's the key concept. So even back in jQuery, and I think I did the same thing in Vue and Angular, I had to make a check on what was visible in order to re-render it. So, sending the information into memory for JavaScript is different than, just rendering it in the DOM. And it's those DOM operations that are really costly, right? So that's the key difference in performance I've noticed. In terms of what's useful, again, if you're showing detailed information, doing it more than once a second is kind of a waste. And even then, if you animated it still comes in smooth and doesn't have a jerky look to it. But there are some cases where, say if you're doing line charts or something, where if you want to send more rapid updates to that, it would have a smooth look to it. But that's a pretty light operation.
Very nice. So I mean, this is a JavaScript podcast. We haven't really talked much about JavaScript at all yet. What tools are you using, on the front end in the browser for being able to do these rendering, this visualization?
Yeah, so I did mention, the frameworks, right? React is the current one. Create React app is easily the nicest boilerplate thing that I've worked with. Half of the technologies that it integrates, I probably wouldn't use if they didn't make it so easy. So I appreciate it. But on top of that, I use ANTV as the UI framework. It's been very pleasant to work with. And they recently packaged up ANTV for visualization. That kind of, it doesn't integrate to ANTD quite as seamlessly as the naming might imply, but it is a huge improvement in terms of the visualization capabilities and how flexible it is. So I can appreciate it for that. So for example, lately I've been working with the ANTV G6, which is a graphing library. And prior to that, the only one that I could get to do everything I wanted without paying thousands of dollars was Cytoscape. But the Cytoscape is pretty cool. It's a little quirky, and the ANTV's G6 definitely adds a lot more features without having to get a plugin for every feature and stuff. And so that's actually been a big improvement for me. Those are kind of the, run all the visualization stuff, unless I start developing things more custom. Sometimes I like to do, sometimes I float between, can I do this customization or in CSS versus Canvas versus, JavaScript DOM elements. And I'm not quite sure where the right balance and time is for that. Some of that ends up feeling very experimental. I have some posted libraries on some of these experiments. But for general tools, a couple that people might not know about that are big advantage for me have been AlaSql. So AlaSql allows you to dump a whole bunch of data into in-memory, JavaScript tables, and then, query them as if they're SQL. So obviously this is geared more towards people who are super comfortable with SQL, as I am, but it's been a whole lot easier than keeping or having to write my own for loops or something to count up statistics and, deep hierarchy JavaScript JavaScript objects or something. And then pop-up parse is intended to be a CSV parser, but it does a whole lot more than that, and has been a big help in a lot of projects where I have to convert data between different.
Nice. Now, what about the stream of data coming from the servers? I mean, what data formats and strategies are you using there? I mean, is it WebSockets? Using JSON? I mean, what?
Yeah, even coming from the servers, that can be different at different scales. I've worked with Redis, Mongo, some other NoSQL stuff. Those have the advantage of being able to handle bursts pretty well. MQTT, pretty common as a lightweight option, and pretty easy to work with.
Oh, you used MQTT. Nice.
Yeah.
What broker did you use?
It's almost always the Mosquito one.
And on the JavaScript side?
On the JavaScript side, I just grab like whatever library. I've got a React library for it, and I've got some Node libraries for it. I don't pay too much attention to what it is.
Fun story. I am probably the maintainer of the JavaScript library that you're using. So, fun story. So if you find yourself, like, there is a quick bit of self-promotion. If you find yourself wanting to tinker also on the server side of MQTT for some reason, there is this project called Aidis. I am going to put the link into the podcast thing. It's actually pretty lightweight, and you can use it in Node.js, and you can connect it with WebSocket from a browser for devices and so on and so forth. It's pretty neat, and you can actually do a lot of things with it. So,
all right, I will definitely check it out. So you mentioned WebSockets. I still use WebSockets for some things, and that depends on what the technology behind it is. Just because there's a lot of mature libraries for working with WebSockets over SSL. Right. The tough thing about WebSockets can be that you don't want to do the queuing in the browser. I've cooked a lot of laptops that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it depends. I float between things, but WebSockets I frequently revisit, MQTT, and then it depends on what the object store on the other end of those are. That kind of determines if I need to get away from those.
Right. So not necessarily a single go-to stack. It's just whatever works best for the current application you built.
Yeah, I think that's a generic and common answer, but yes.
No, it works. No, I mean this is fascinating. Definitely fascinating stuff. Yeah, in terms of the data visualization, kind of being a crossover between kind of the aesthetics, user experience, software development, and often math. How do you recommend somebody to enter the field? Where should somebody start with regards to, kind of really getting into this and sinking their teeth in?
Yeah. So first, I'm gonna disagree a little bit on the math thing, and then dispel slightly the aesthetics part. You can have a pretty chart that's useless. I think we've all seen those. Um, and you can also have a complex calculation that's meaningless, right? And those aren't even edge cases. Those are both very common. So really, the primary thing about doing good visualizations is understanding the data, understanding the context of that data. Context is truly key on that stuff. And trying to make it as useful as you can. So it's going to be hard to talk any more about that without talking about, in general, the theory of what your goals are on visualizing the data. I would say in the support of the math thing, after understanding the context of the data and things like state of what state things are in when you get to certain points in the data, which I think is often missed. The one math related thing is statistics. Right? So, but statistics are pretty light in terms of math. But I could talk more about how I divide up the goals. So I think people often, they take data and then they're saying, well, what kind of chart can I apply this to? Or what kind of chart can I apply to this? And it's premature, right? Just applying a chart to data because, let's say, applying a line chart to a time series data or a pie chart to distribution data, that's premature without first trying to understand your goals. I divide them into three main categories. The first one being sales. And I'm not just, it's not tongue in cheek. What I mean by sales is you're showing, you have a predetermined answer, right? I like to use infographics as a good example of this one. Whenever you see an infographic, the person who put it together is usually trying to get a point across, and they're just giving you numbers that support that point. So, they kind of started with the answer, and then they grab a bunch of data that supports that answer and illustrate it out to you. And, you see this in sales cases, true sales cases, but you also see it in when people are just trying to convince you of a point or an argument or whatever. The next category is reporting. And reporting is when you have a known question. So every time, at the end of the month, every time, I get my data in, I want to know what was our revenue, what was our cost, shipping expenses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a known question, and you're just looking for the canned answer for each of those. And these are usually done for things like, business decisions, right? If we go over this number on our travel expenses, we need to start telling people to get cheaper hotels or whatever. And then the last category is analysis. And this is where I think it starts to get a lot more fun. In analysis, you are really exploring the data. You're supposed to let the data lead you instead of looking for something specific inside of it, right? And this is where you start, developing your techniques and intuition as to, what's interesting in the data to follow. The things that I typically look for are, what's anomalous, what's common versus what's significant, and in general, how can I make it just more useful? And the data that you have and the context that it's in is usually varies a lot in between each thing you're applying it to when you're really looking at it for analysis reasons. Even the absence of certain data will be significant to you if you understand that data well. So yeah, it's this last category I think is most interesting. Most people understand the sales and reporting stuff, but it's a lot of this analysis area that people don't really get into, but also is where things like hey, you got this error you didn't expect, or your schema changed, or somebody sent a giant SQL injection in your last name field, and it made it into the database. Things like that.
Right.
It's really fantastic. It's that type of analysis is often. I've done a lot of data analysis for to understand if what performance problem a Node.js process can have in production, and it's so fascinating that it happened even today. Somebody sent me a colleague of ours sent me a picture of one of our app in production that's getting a lot of traffic, and it sent me this. Well, I have, overnight we have this. There's not much traffic going on, and we have the servers are mostly idle, but they're only consuming always 5% of CPU time, and we don't really understand why. There's very little traffic. They should not be getting like any bump at all. Should be zero. And it was such a nice thing. It was just, yeah, and this time, and then it dropped after we did a deploy, and they told them, look, you have a set interval in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In like one side, like it was, and it was tumbling for this for like a few days. So
Yeah, it reminds me of a scenario I was in security-wise, where we did threat intelligence, and we would have all kinds of honeypots or other deception technologies set up everywhere, and get information back from them, and then try to determine what's going on. And one of the big things to understand on the security front is this a person interactively targeting something, or is this something automated? And one of the things we ended up having to do was do some pattern analysis on the frequency of things being hit. And so the way we even came up with that is by taking all of the a certain intersection of logs, and plotting them against different pivots of time. So we would have one chart that would be weekly, one chart that would be monthly, another one for time of day. And if you charted all these things out on just a normal thing, it was very difficult to see on a normal like line chart. But when you did a scatter plot on these three different pivots, it was immediately obvious that one bubble that intersected on a day of week or time of day or something like that would just be way bigger than the rest, or sometimes it would contain almost all the data, and you could immediately see, oh well, somebody's got a cron job set up for this, or some other kind of automation, and that turned into that visualization helped us understand and turn something into a script later, right? Because most of this stuff is very iterative. You find something, you take action on it, and go find something else.
And your point there about the visualization, somebody can have a fancy visualization and just being useless, and you're not being able to get that kind of intelligence out of it. Just reminded me of this one customer I was with a couple of years ago. They had this big fancy display showing metrics from all across their system being captured in real time. They had it, up on a big monitor on their wall for all their team to see. And I walked in, and their project manager brought me up to it and said, "Well, I mean, we have this display. He was so proud of it and everything else." He goes, "Our problem is, regardless of how fancy it is, none of us know how to read it, right?" And he just said, okay, we will continue, we'll pay to come in and help us fix this problem if you can look at this board and tell us where our problem is. and it really does go back to that point. If you have the context of what the data means, then it becomes relatively simple. I was able to look at it and spot the memory leak that they were having, and pointed to the graph and said, this one right here is where your problem. Let's investigate this one.
I think one frequent one on especially complex systems that people can immediately get some value from is to maintain the relationships in how they visualize stuff. So I don't know, how many times have you seen a systems dashboard and it's looking at dozens or hundreds of systems, and all you just see is a bunch of line charts, but you don't understand that, this one is the queue server, that one's the database server amongst, 5 other database servers, and, what the impact of the state of one has on the other parts of the system and why. Right? But if you take like your architecture diagram and you turn that into your dashboard, your monitoring dashboard, and each block in your architecture diagram had a state and recent activity and stuff like that, you could very quickly understand, okay, well, if this machine got bogged down for whatever reason or ran out of disk space, then the systems that are dependent on it are, they're going to have see lighter load and might report different things, and the ones behind it will start reporting timeouts and things of that nature. And a lot of the information you're seeing makes a lot more sense because you see the relationships along with the status.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, and I'm very happy to see that a lot of the distributed tracing technologies, like we see in Istio and Jaeger, some of these, some of these emerging standards and tools for distributed tracing are making that easier for us to do those visualizations by preserving the context through. Matteo, I know you've had some experience with that.
Yeah, I love this. Like, distributed tracing is one of those things where you have a big crossover between data visualization, data collection, data storage, processing, and performance, cost, less logistic of all of it, and overhead. Is actually pretty. It's a pretty fascinating field that I've been like toying for a long time. I worked on a lot of microservice system where that was one of the hardest bit, and it can either make or break a team. Essentially, if a team, like most of those tools are really powerful if you know how to read them and how to diagnose the problems. However, in order to do that, you need to know the ins and outs on how that specific tool would work, like what is the data, because you are completely lacking the context. Okay, so you need to know how that data is processed, consumed, and it arrives there. But a lot of time, you basically just the act of teaching somebody. Like very recently, we had to teach somebody to read those tools, to read Jagger. I think that was the tool that we were trying to tell them. We were all doing all the reporting and stuff, but it was all there, and they were just like, yeah, but why can't we just have logs? And we just, yeah, but with this it takes 1 second to figure it out. Why can't we just have logs? So it's that's.
Well, I mean, it's not a different problem from using a interactive debugger versus just using a console log. Sometimes the logs, they're faster and easier, and you just use what works. But the distributed tracing, it is. As long as you've not separated it too much from the context, then you can drive a lot more information out of it. So probably the final question, we're coming up to the end of our time on this, and the final question I would have for Anthony, and kind of going back to the previous question, is where would somebody start? If they're just getting into this field, what are the first set of actions that someone should take to start getting their feet wet?
Yeah, so first I would say start with data. Right, the data should be something that's significant to you and that you're interested in actually asking questions of. Beyond that, you can join a community. There's a thing called the Data Visualization Society. It's a very active Slack group, and lots of different perspectives and stuff. It helps to get other eyes and thoughts on what you're doing. I also run meetups and stuff when it comes to data visualization, just because, like I said, it's good to not be in a vacuum on this stuff. But then you ask questions of the data, and you explore it, you let it lead you. When you are working with a known set of data, it's good to see what's available, and then see if that's providing the information to you. One of the ways to know if that can be improved is how many steps after that do you need to routinely take in order to get to something meaningful. So a lot of the stuff that you guys are talking about, where somebody's looking at an array of at least 16 charts or something, and they have to decide what that means, right? The more steps you have to take after looking at information, the more opportunity there is to improve that, to reduce those steps. Part of that's going to be exposing more data up front, or making some of those correlations earlier, so that you don't have to take as many steps. And then after you start adding all this information into things like dashboards, and you keep finding new things, you keep adding them to the dashboards, at some point you need to start taking away and say, I thought this was cool, it was different, but I hardly ever see anything of value. The only time I see something of value there is when this happens. Okay, well, reduce that from a full heavy chart into just an alert for when that case happens. And start reducing the distractions, and just leave what is important to you in making decisions, and making your life easier. And then iterate, and share what's working for you and what's not. And and this is where I think the community stuff starts to help out. And at least everybody that I've seen that is into this as a passion area is very generous when it comes to their thoughts, their perspectives, their techniques on improving your data visualizations.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I can never argue with anything that says you can actually remove something or hide it away to simplify. That's always a good argument for me. Fantastic. Well, Anthony, we definitely appreciate the chat. It's been fun. This is a fantastic topic to get into. We are at the end of our time. So, Matteo, do you have any closing thoughts or questions?
It's I'm always fascinated by data viz. I would love to be way better at it, and I bought some books, never be able to finish them or actually becoming better at it. My career has taken different turns, but good luck to everybody that wants to try. And I think this is there's going to be more need for this kind of professionals overall in the future. So it's so fantastic to hear from an expert. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and close. There was a lot of tools and projects that were mentioned. We're going to make sure the links for all of those get into the show notes. And just as a reminder, you can find episodes of OpenHive.JS on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find another player. Also, if you go to anchor.fm, OpenHive.JS, you'll find other places to listen. And thanks for joining us, Anthony. And that's it.
All right, thanks, guys.
This has been another episode of OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript, from Nearform. Be sure to subscribe to OpenHive.JS on your favorite podcast player. Join us next time for more insighted opinions from the open source and JavaScript communities. Until then, I am Matteo Collina. Thanks for listening.